In chapter 1, where we looked at possible inconsistencies between the attributes of God, I said that the most glaring inconsistency and the most frequently referred to was that between God's omnipotence and his omnibenevolence. This results in the so-called problem of evil, which is, for many, the principal objection to God's existence. Chapter 3 deals with this in detail, and I should like now to say something about it. From my experience in the classroom, it's very easy to treat this topic too academically, as if it doesn't really impinge upon our lives. So I get my students, for example, to read Primo Levi's experiences of the concentration camps, or the famous passage in Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. We can then begin to think about what evil actually and practically means as one can meet it in our everyday lives. More traditionally, however, evil is divided into two types. There's moral evil, which proceeds from human action, i.e. killing, war, mental and physical torture, etc. And there is non-moral evil, which occurs through natural calamities, for example, earthquakes, disease, and so on. As we've seen already, at root the problem is a very simple one. How can suffering, in whatever form, exist in a world created by a benign deity? Whether that suffering arises through human agency, for example the Holocaust, or through natural disasters, for example the tsunami of 2004. Any theistic attempt to resolve this alleged incompatibility is, following Leibniz, called a theodicy, and down the centuries many classic theodicies have been offered. Modern commentators make a further distinction between two versions of the problem. Its logical form, that the existence of evil is logically incompatible with God's existence, and its evidential form, that while not logically incompatible with the existence of God, the sheer weight and variety of suffering in the world makes religious belief untenable. So let's take these two in turn. In the history of theology, there have been many attempts to resolve the logical form of the problem, but two stand out. First, there is the so-called free will defence associated with Augustine and in our own day with Plantinga and Swinburne. According to this, evil derives from the God-given ability of human beings to choose between good and evil acts. But this defence has been rejected on various grounds. God, after all, could have created human beings with free will, but who were yet incapable of doing wrong. This is Mackie's suggestion. And God cannot so easily pass the buck and must still be held indirectly responsible for the evil acts of his creatures, since he could have intervened to offset their worst excesses. The second defence is called the argument from soul-making. God, it is claimed, allows or brings about evil in order to enable individuals to become morally and spiritually mature. This argument can be traced back to St. Irenaeus, but its most prominent present-day proponent is John Hick. The value of suffering, it is said, lies in the improvement of character which follows from the demands placed on the individual seeking to overcome that suffering, these leading to the development of such qualities as resilience, courage, and self-sacrifice. The invariable criticism of this approach is that, however laudable the goal of moral improvement may be, the end is not justified by the excessive hardship often endured to achieve it. It's fair to say, however, that there's been a major shift away from the logical dilemma and towards its evidential counterpart. The most frequent reason given for this is that in the 1970s, Plantinga came up with a version of the free will defence which defeated Mackey, a fact that Mackey accepted. Hence the return to the evidential argument. This proceeds on a different tack and presents an inductive or probabilistic argument from evil for the non-existence of God. That the existence of God provides prima facie reasons for the probability, if not the possibility, that no God exists. An omnipotent and omnibenevolent being could have prevented the intense suffering which we are all too well aware of, and he could have done this without at the same time preventing some greater good or even some greater evil. But this he has not chosen to do, and for this reason alone we may reject his existence. This then is not a logical argument against God so much as a judicial conclusion following evidence brought against him. This is the area of debate which, perhaps unsurprisingly, and in my experience, you find students reacting to with the greatest emotional involvement. And that is as it should be. But the great test of philosophy is, even in these situations, to keep a very tight hold on the reins and to analyse that emotional reaction in such a way that students can begin to unpack how they feel. This essential distancing in such a highly charged area is, I believe, the supreme test of rationality and the most important as well as the hardest thing that philosophy can teach us.